found very interesting. I looked at several presentations and I kept coming back to the Walrus. And really, if you look at this aircraft, those two pictures look far better than it ever could be. They're just nice pictures and below, and I've kept them as sort of the watermark throughout. You would really just say that this aircraft is eccentric. It really was outdated and out of place by the time the war started. They really didn't think it would feature further, but it did, and it carried on flying till 1958. Because it established a really good reputation for its reliability and its ability to withstand damage. And I'm not talking about battle damage, I'm talking more about water and wave, the damage that one takes when you land next to a battleship and get hoisted up and reused, recycled, and catapulted off, and then land in rough seas and then get hoisted back up onto the ship, and landing on land and taking off on land and landing on water and taking off on water and landing on land. It really could withstand a lot of damage, and because it had a lot of wood and a lot of dope, it could be repaired very quickly. It certainly wasn't an aircraft that liked to attract any kind of firearms against it. It didn't have any real defensive capability, and it lumbered along slowly. But she was really loved, and she was loved for all the very right reasons. And there were second thoughts. There's literature that says there were second thoughts that when the war started, that they'd even put her in the front line or put her into use. But she served in roles that she really excelled in. She didn't shoot down aircraft. She didn't bomb cities. She didn't bomb enemy concentrations. She didn't do cab ranks or rhubarbs, and really didn't feature in newsreels and didn't feature in limelight anywhere. It was just a plane that worked in the background and did a very good job at what it was there to do. The Walrus one was aluminium alloy, but the War Office said, we're not allowing any more precious alloys to be allocated to her. So they made it out of wood. And if you talk to any of our North African Desert Air Force pilots, they loved the aeroplane. It meant life to them. And when they went over to Sicily and then to Italy, well, South Africans didn't do Sicily. They went straight over to Italy because they all came back to the Union to do further training and things like that, and regroup, and then went back in. She really was loved by them. Over 1,000 pilots were rescued from the sea during the conflict from beginning to end. She could work just as easily off the hard as she could off the water, as she could off a catapult. He even did some carrier landings and carrier takeoffs, and was happiest in harbors and estuaries. And that's because the water was a lot calmer. Although I think anyone who knows seaplanes knows that it's difficult to come stuck, even a stepped hull, off glassy, smooth water. You always sent, in Durban, our Sunderlands always sent motorboats out ahead of them to create a bit of a chop and upset the swell, to create a bit of a chop so that they could come unstuck a lot easier off the water, break up the surface tension and the cohesion. So they were happiest in a estuary and working out of harbors. Robert Mitchell was the designer, and it first flew in 1933, and she had a lot of firsts in her. She was the first military plane of Britain to have retractable gear, first to have a fully enclosed cockpit and all metal fuselage, and also the first to have retractable gear down, gear up indicators in the cockpit. The Spitfire had them in the wings. You had to look left and right. It was very comfortable to be able to see those little telltales poking up to tell you your wheels were down or up. So her real role was for the Fleet Air Arm as an amphibious plane. And that's important to note that she wasn't just a seaplane, she was amphibious. She needed her landing gear, either for takeoff or landing, and often, as not, took off on water and landed on land or vice versa. She was often housed on capital ships, to work in a dual role with the capital ships as their spotter. So she never needed, wherever she operated, she didn't need range. So she wasn't known for long range. She could do 600 miles. When you look at the heavy bombers, they call her really short distance compared to what they could do. Only 740 were ever built, the last being withdrawn in 1958. I have found so many different datas that I still can't sort out how many were lost through being shot down, how many were lost to gunfire, anti-aircraft gunfire, and how many airframes were lost in training or accidents. But well over half of them were lost during the conflict and didn't see life after that. It served in all theaters, very active in the Channel, where most of the losses occurred, and in the Med, and the Middle East, and in Burma. And so she, sorry, 740 aircraft were built. There was relatively low attrition compared to other aircraft. So her primary role was as a catapult-launched aircraft off cruisers and battleships. Now, if you look at that, you immediately say that doesn't fit well on a cruiser. They'd swing the catapult out a beam, which also made it difficult to take off. Unlike the catapult aircraft merchantman ships, where the Hurricane was launched almost fore and aft at an oblique angle off the bow, the captain could turn into the wind. The captain didn't turn into the wind, otherwise it would have an abeam wind. So you had to take off watching the swell and take off as the nose of the catapult lifted up into the air. The teamwork between the pilot and the launch operator had to be pretty sharp so that you took off as the bow or the roll was bringing the nose of the catapult up into the air to give you the most height. She was used for spotting to show the fall of shot at ranges where the cruisers and battleships were shooting at extreme ranges, and she could then report back and say what the correction had to be to get the fall of shot. Her wings, which were 47 foot, which is not a lot, as we'll see in the comparison a little bit later. 47 foot's a very small wingspan, so she's not a big aircraft, but they folded on hinges at the wing roots and could fold to bring her beam to just 17 feet wide, which is very convenient for pushing it into a hangar. That's what she looks like on the land. Now, if you have a look in this photograph at the wheel nacelles when she goes upright, the wheels actually assist a hell of a lot in locking those wheels in the deployed position. So once they go up, the wheels actually fit very snugly in, and the wheel struts become wing struts as well and help with stabilizing the aircraft quite a bit. So there she is, coming into her hangar, having been lifted up by the derrick crane on the bow, and then she gets pushed back into the hangar, and there you can see the cradle ready for receiving it when it's going to come time for launch again. So there you see the layout of the wings in the top right there. Very interesting. She could carry 272 kilos of bombs. So that gave her a bit of an offensive capability, although that's not really a lot, and that was only used for, or mainly used for anti-submarine. And the best it could do was suppress a submarine from surfacing, keep it down, not do much damage. They're not well known for destroying aircraft. I like this picture in the bottom right because if you follow those rivets, you can see the aluminium framework would be behind those rivets, and you can see the structural support behind that bit of the skin. The like a lot of planes of that era, the control surfaces were material and dope. And the bottom left, you can see how the wing, how the wheel, when it goes into its upright, into its folded away position, nests into that hole and then acts as a support. She had an indicator flag that came up in the cockpit and let the pilot know they were fully retracted and let the pilot know they were fully deployed. And that was very, very useful. And then her tail wheel was a sked, not a rolling wheel. It acted as a rudder as well, and she was a tail dragger, and served for guiding her on the land as well as on the water for taxiing. Quite strong. The horizontal surfaces were positioned quite high up on the tail fin and braced on either side by struts to help her keep her rigidity. There you can very clearly see the canvas and dope covering of the control surfaces. The lifting gear was kept recessed in a compartment just behind the main spar and right up above the engine. So the crew would climb up out the top of the cabin next to where the co-pilot would sit, would climb straight up onto the wing. And if I point out there, you can see these recessed steps. I got better photographs. He would pull those out. They fitted flush and climb up the engine, rear of the nacelle, and extract the lifting gear. It was very difficult to do this in rough water. And there you can see it being lifted up, straight up and out. Derek, a jib crane, would then pull her up out the water. This obviously made the mothership very vulnerable at this point to any other form of attack. It meant that they were almost static in the water for quite a long time, and no one wanted to do that. So heaving line would be thrown out, and you can see there the pilot's got the other end of the heaving line. The crew would pass it down to him, and there they just hold onto it or anchor it onto the aircraft so they can its direct ability pulling it aboard. And there you can see over here the recessed foot pegs that make it very convenient to climb up the back of the engine nacelle and get to where you have to be on the top of the wing. Nice picture of the sliding windows left and right. So crew often embarked by either coming on the top and dropping straight in, or they could hoist themselves in at the side there and get in from the side, and also as equally get out along the side. That whole window slid all the way back, as did the sunroof, which meant that they were always pretty much exposed to the sun out at sea, although I think glare was a bigger problem than what the sun was from glare for the water than the sun would have been from the top. But that was the way of ingress or egress. You can see the hatch cover in the front, which was used for mooring. You could also mount the Vickers gun over there, and that's where they did all the rescue work of downed pilots. So the pilot would either have to be helped. She could carry crew of four, but actually mainly flew with a crew of three. The pilot always stayed put, and the other two crew would then help recover the the downed crew, and there's some nice footage in the video of that actually happening. There's another view of the windows showing you more from the side, so you can see how wide it is when it's slid open. You could quite easily bail out from there or get in from there, climbing up the side. It had this 680 horsepower Pegasus radial engine, Pegasus 2 Mark II, and she was a pusher. So she was mounted on those 4 struts you can see here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And she really was a string bag, pulled taut and into shape by cables all over. And as a pusher, that kept her as far away from the spray as you could get it, although you'll see in the footage she got plenty wet, and clouds of steam would come off those exposed cylinders. The engine nacelle contained the oil tank. The intake was from the front, and that would act as an oil cooler. And I suppose it might have ostensibly helped to reduce noise level, but the skin is so thin, I don't think you ever escape the noise of the propeller and the radial engine. What's interesting about that propeller, they fixed pitch wooden propellers. They're two-bladed mounted next to each other. I think I've got some pictures that better depict that somewhere. I can't pick it up here, but I think I've got some pictures better depicting those two-bladed propellers mounted fore and aft. So if we just have a look at some statistics, she had a single Bristol Pegasus. She had crew of 3 up to 4. She wasn't very heavy, 7,200 pounds, 3.2 tons on takeoff weight. Empty was only 2.2. She had a very short wingspan, 47 foot, 46 foot 10, which is nearest, damn it, another 2 inches, and she's 47 foot. She wasn't very long. She was short and stubby, and 15 foot high, and that's because she had 2 wings. Only 610 square feet of surface area on the wing, and she was slow. 135 miles an hour is not fast, but she could go up to, some literature says, 18,000 feet, which was higher than the Catalina could go, and she had a range of 600 miles, which was fine for the role she was in. She didn't need any more. There's never any literature of the range being the problem for the aircraft. It was used for short sorties, going out to rescue pilots, going out to do reconnaissance work, and going out to report back on the fall of shot in a naval engagement. She didn't have much offensive capability. She could take 272 kilos of bombs. You had to drop them all at once. You couldn't drop them 1, 2, 3, 4 in any order. And she had 2 Vickers machine guns, and she could put them either in the bow or she could put them in a dorsal position. But that's not really any defensive or offensive armament. It doesn't do much. The 3 major variants were the metal Seagull 5. The second metal hull was the Walrus 1, and then the wooden variant was the Walrus 2, of which there were most of them built. She was known affectionately as either the shagbat or the steam pigeon. And those were enduring names, not very much critical names. I've put together this table just so that we can get some perspective, and so the perspectives in order of the Catalina, which we can all visualize, reference, get perspective of her size by referencing against the Catalina. But if you have a look at the German aircraft, they were much faster aircraft, and uh, and supposedly more efficient. The Catalina had the famous Pratt& Whitney 1830s, very reliable, very good engines, totally different roles, totally different purposes, and yet she was faster than the Catalina because she was so much lighter than the Catalina as well. I've highlighted the speed and the range and the ceiling because those are very important characteristics in her job. The power wasn't really necessary because she wasn't designed to go tearing in and tearing out. She was designed to get there reliably, put down on the water reliably, and get off the water again. And 18,500 was um, a a good height for her to have a surface ceiling. Although I don't think she cruised much at 18,000. I've tried to ask AI, ChatGPT, if they flew many missions at that height, but because she flew mostly short-range missions, ChatGPT doesn't give me any reliable answers. So if you compare her weight against all the others, she's very light in weight compared to the Catalina and the Heinkel and the Blumenfoss aircraft. And that helped her a lot in coming unstuck off the water and getting back into the air. So where she really excelled was because of her slow speed, spotting down pilots. The casualties in the channel were obviously because she had no match against a Messerschmitt. She had no match against a Messerschmitt 109 or 110 or a or any of the Focke-Wulf 190. She didn't have the agility. She was as bad as a ferry backing out of trouble. So if she was pounced on, best thing was to drop back into the water and await rescue. So in the Mediterranean, she did a lot of pilot recovery, and in the Bertha and in the Channel Theatre, she did a lot of pilot recovery. She'd be dispatched and go and find, and if she couldn't put down launches, would go out. But she excelled at dropping down. There's quite a lot of literature and nice stories of during the Italian campaign of South Africans who, if they had a problem, knew that if they dropped into the sea, there was a good chance a walrus would pitch up over the horizon, see you, waggle its wings, and then come and settle down and pick you up. And it was very hardy in that sort of role in landing on the water. So let's look at her offensive defensive capabilities. She just had the two or the three Vickers machine guns, one in the bow position or two in the dorsal, or just two because of the weight, and she'd move them fore and aft as they were needed. She wasn't built for anything offensive, so I wouldn't say she was really using the armament for offensive capability. The specs here say 350 going up, where they pushed it to 355, and that was and she wasn't really used offensively in other role. At her speed, if she dropped bombs on an E-boat, the E-boat could outmaneuver those bombs very easily. You'd have to really catch them sleeping. But there's no literature on her successfully attacking anything and sinking anything other than suppressing submarines, making them drop down out of sight. And that meant that the vessels could the submarine and get clear. And the submarine felt it was safe to get back to the surface. Whatever they'd been hunting on the surface would have moved on, and they'd have to start their tracking again. So speed and stability at slow speeds was a big advantage for search and rescue and for range finding and range reporting. I've drawn up some summaries here. She was mainly in the Fleet Air Arm, used extensively by the Navy. Her amphibious capability was her retractable undercarriage. There aren't many cases where she deployed from a catapult and wasn't recovered. Most cases she was deployed and then recovered. And unlike the CAM, the Catapult Aircraft Merchantman, that Hurricane, once it took off, the pilot, he had two choices: splash down with the plane and hope it didn't break up, which it often didn't, but that was very risky, or bail out and parachute and hope one of the vessels would be able to send a launch out and recover the pilot. It was incredibly brave of the Catapult Aircraft Hurricanes to actually take off, knowing that that plane wasn't gonna land on land unless they were close enough to it. But it was expendable, and their life was considered expendable as well. They would easily be considered not in infested waters and be left behind. So the Walrus was operated where it could be recovered again. Her hull made her nice and strong underneath so that she could be picked up and withstand the structure. So she was well suited. Don't be confused when it says here the Walrus had rugged metal hull. Her aluminium was round her waist and her water, where the structural strength was needed. Like with lots of aircraft, the ribs and strakes were often were wooden towards the tail, and then covered with dope, canvas and dope. She was very well suited for ASR. She could land in pretty gnarly seas, and she was seaworthy. She could sit and wait for calmness, or wait for darkness to take off again, or she could attempt to take off. She was ship friendly. The wings could fold back. She could be put back on board, recycled in pretty quick time and reused. And the endurance was good enough. 600 miles was more than what you needed for reconnaissance patrols at sea, for spotting, artillery spotting, for naval engagements, and for rescue missions. It didn't need the sort of range that a bomber needed, or reconnaissance aircraft that went on photographic missions over enemy territory. So her endurance was great for the role that she was designed for. It was very versatile. It was used in multi-roles, although anti-submarine warfare, ASW, was very limited. And she had very, very stable flying qualities. And then the unique engine layout, the pusher, meant that the prop was and the engine were kept relatively clear of spray, and not in the face of spray. It also allowed for the crew to board and get out of it without being in the way of the propeller if it was a puller configuration. So she was very slow. She wasn't graceful, but those are the tributes that made it the real workhorse for so many dangerous jobs, and made her so loved by all the Allied pilots and enemy pilots that had to ditch into the water. So then summary is my presentation on the walrus. I've got some videos. We can watch one of them now, and then we can stop for a short break. And just want to change the screen I'm sharing.